The Philadelphia Eagles have one more preseason game for players to make the case for why they should be on the 2024 roster, but we've got one more 53-man roster prediction for you before the game coming up next, right here on Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, this Tuesday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri. We're brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers, you can bet $5 and get a free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Sunday Ticket's got some cool new features too. Four-way customizable split. Gino can input your fantasy team, I guess, so you can almost do like a kind of fantasy setup too. I'm just pumped to watch some football. We've got one more Eagles preseason game before the real action starts this Saturday night. Before that, though, we've got another 53-man roster prediction. We both did one, and we're going to compare and contrast. And, man, there were some tough spots, man. Like, there were a couple positions at the bottom. I'm like, I don't know who to keep in and who to let off this team.
Add in the fact that there are some positions where they might be adding talent from outside of the building before the end of this whole equation. And there are some talented ball players that are going to be kept off this team, unfortunately, but there are some rules with the expanded practice squad that can help them hide some players, especially the guys that are beyond that first contract. Once they become vested veterans, they no longer have to go through the waiver process once the cut down season does start. So you'll see guys probably like John Ross, who, if they don't make the team right away, they'll probably be a practice squad type of signing. Then they can elevate him without subjecting him to waivers. But a lot of the young guys, Lou, they might have to make the team simply to protect the talent that you do have at certain positions of depth. Because we've talked about teams in the past where it's like, man, in 2 to 3 years, like look at that 2018 team. How many guys in that defensive secondary could you see actually be in there long term? Now you're looking at positions like the offensive line and defensive line and the secondary as well. And you're saying, man, we have so much young talent. We can't let these guys get out of the building. Like, for once, we actually have a culmination of depth at some of these positions. So let's hang on to it. And maybe it might subject some of these veterans to getting cut at that cut down day, but you have to protect the rookie contracts. You have to protect that young talent, because there have been years where the Eagles haven't had a lot of it, and they've been hoping for years like this.
All right, Gino, so we both did our 53-man roster predictions before the show, so let's dive right into it. Got a lot to get into. I'll start at quarterback. I think this one's pretty easy. I think we both probably agree. Jalen Hurts, Kenny Pickett, Tanner McKee. Any love for Will Grier? I think we're on the same page there, right?
Will Grier might be the only guy I've ever seen get subbed into a preseason game and then get subbed out of the preseason game.
So it's funny. My girlfriend is a West Virginia fan. Asks me all the time how Will Grier is doing. Don't have the heart to tell her he's not making the roster.
He's not going to be a Philadelphia Eagle for long. I think 3 is the way to go, unless something crazy happens where teams like, hey, we need Kenny Pickett and a Sam Bradford Minnesota Vikings trade were to arise. These are the 3 that you're going into the season with, and you'll probably see Tanner McKee designated as that emergency third quarterback on game day, and we'll see how it shapes up
so,
after
but
that.
I definitely agree with you there. At running back, Gino, I think it's the top 3, right? Saquon Barkley, Kenneth Gainwell, Will Shipley. I like Kendall Milton. Lou Nichols has looked pretty solid this summer. I just don't know if either have done enough to make the roster over players at maybe more important positions right now.
Yeah, you're looking at that team last year, and you're probably saying, oh, wow, should we have kept Trey Sermon over a guy like Rashad Penny who never actually played?
Yeah.
I don't think you have that decision at all to make this year.
And, neither probably should have been on the roster last year. The good thing is Milton and or Nichols can be stashed in this practice squad. I can't imagine you're in danger of losing both.
Nope, I think you'll be able to keep both. I liked what I've seen out of Kendall Milton when he does get to carry the rock later in games. And Lou Nichols is really good in the red zone. Very decisive runner, get downhill quickly. But you go into the season with 3. It's kind of the expectation after the draft. We knew the direction that they were going. But it's a good little group you got back there, and I'm excited to see the emergence of Will Shipley and how he can help this group get better.
Totally agree. So we're pretty much chalk right now. We've kept 6 quarterbacks and running backs combined. Here's where it gets interesting, Gino. Who do you have at wide receiver? How many did you keep? I have a little bit of a twist for mine.
So do I. We probably have the same.
Do we both trade for somebody?
Oh, I didn't make
I
a
brought
trade.
an outside player because I'm predicting
Okay.
what they're going to do, and I predicted what receiver specifically I think they'll bring in.
Oh, I didn't get that in the weeds with it.
Yeah, I felt like I got to get real specific. I don't want to say a outside player.
I said 6 guys are going to make the team.
Yeah.
The 6th is to be determined.
Sure.
That I had making the roster that I changed from
so you had 5 guys on the current roster?
Yeah, so I go with AJ, Devontae, Covey, Campbell, Johnny Wilson. Anais Smith was the guy I had making the 53. I don't think he's at threat to be poached via a waiver claim. He'll be stashed on the practice squad. And then who is the guy that they trade for, Lou? Who's number 6?
Yeah, so there's a lot of options. There's people I wanted, but I wanted to do more what I think is most likely. I had them trading for Robert Woods right before the big countdown. Yeah, I think Robert Woods is that third guy, somebody that can play both inside and out, has had a pretty solid preseason, and I think Houston would be more willing to let him go than a Noah Brown or John Mechie, like we've discussed last week.
So we both go with 6.
And outside of that, I kept the same 5 that you did. Yeah.
To be determined on my end, but we both think that that's one position that they more than likely are going to add somebody from the outside.
I went later at tight end, Gino. I only kept 2, and I think in an emergency where somebody gets hurt for one game, you can get by, and then you can bring up an EJ Jenkins or a CJ Uzoma. But I only kept Dallas Goedert and Grant Calcaterra. They think they'll probably keep 3. I just can't justify any of these guys behind the top 2 making the team, and I think you could stash at least a few on the practice squad and then sign or trade for somebody if you really need one. I know Calcaterra has an injury history. He's currently banged up. But I don't know, man. Like, nobody is really running away with that final spot.
This one was tough for me, and I'm probably going to change it from the guy I have on the list. I have, of course, Dallas, Grant, and I put Albert O, but you brought up EJ Jenkins, and I'm thinking, man, if Calcaterra is out, who's the one guy out of those 3 that could be a pseudo replacement if you needed at a time? And EJ Jenkins is the only one who's shown flashes for you in the receiving game so far. This is another one I didn't want to take the easy way out. I think there are plenty of teams that you can go and scour the waiver wire, some veteran guys that should be out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Because does Albert O or CJ Uzama deserve a spot after what they've shown?
That's why, man, I couldn't justify it. I couldn't.
So you go 2, I went 3. I just, based on history, at minimum, I think they keep 3.
Okay, so you have 3 tight ends. I kept 2. For me, I did keep 10 offensive linemen. How many did you keep?
I believe I kept 10 as well. I had 25 total on the offense.
Right. So we both have the starting 5: Mailata, Dickerson, Juergens, Becton, Lane. Who were your bottom 5?
So I went with, of course, Tyler Steen.
Yep.
Fred Johnson is your number 1 at that swing tackle position. I added Darian Kennard after his performances the last couple weeks.
I did too.
Trevor Keegan, I think, is going to be a player. He might step up for you in a game or 2 at time at right guard. And then the one guy that I switched out was Matt Hennessy for Dylan McMahon, simply because Hennessy is a vested veteran at this point. You will be able to protect him via not subjecting him to a waiver claim. And Dylan McMahon, I think, is the second best center you have on this team. Like, I don't want to see Brett Toth snapping the ball at all for you if Cam Juergens were to go down.
We could have probably just predicted this together again, because we've been pretty much chalk for our offense.
Yeah,
because I kept the exact same. I like Hennessy more than I think the Eagles do. He doesn't seem to be Stoutland's guy. Toth has been getting a lot more reps than him. McMahon has looked really solid at center, so I threw him in there as well over Hennessy. The only difference we both brought in a new receiver as well. The only difference for our offense, you kept 25 players, I kept 24. I went later at tight end with 2, Goddard and Calcaterra. Gino also kept on the roster Alberto. So overall, though, Gino, I think it's hard to disagree a lot with that unit. It might be like what guard you'd rather keep, or like what interior swing lineman. But outside of that, I think it is pretty chalk.
And unless one of these wide receivers goes nuclear in this third preseason game, and the barometer where we have to look at this, Lou, is, has anybody been a Paul Turner for this team. And if you're new to the Eagles, Paul Turner was a legendary performer in the preseason, and even that wasn't good enough to get him solidified as a 53-man roster candidate. So probably outside looking in, there were other teams that have had players step up to the bat in the preseason. And man, if Howie Roseman has ever been at a poker table and just held up his cards and said, this is what I have, or this is what I don't have, he's told the world he needs a wide receiver 3. It's so evident right now that they want to go and get another one.
Definitely tipped his hand. The defense, I think, is going to have a lot more questions. Who do we predict is going to make the roster for the Eagles defense? Coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook and the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. We've got something a little bit different for you, though, from FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5, and you're going to get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's right, a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket with a YouTube TV base plan. You'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you got to do is create a Google account and current form of payment. You can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. So go bet on Jalen Hurts to win the MVP of the 2024 season. You'll get that 3-week free trial for NFL Sunday Ticket. Might not just be Jalen, though. Bet on Quinyon Mitchell to win Rookie of the Year. All that and more. You can bet on the Phillies, futures for the NBA. FanDuel, the America's #1 sportsbook and the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're predicting the Eagles' 53-man roster, a few days away from the Eagles' preseason finale. So, Gino, this could change again, but we've had a lot of practices to go off of, 2 preseason games, a lot of tape. So I don't know if this is really going to change dramatically. I mean, there's some guys that can definitely tip the Eagles' hand, but I don't think you're going to see 15 different players make it because of Saturday's result.
There's probably anywhere from 7 to 12 guys that they might have ants in their pants right now. They might be itching a little bit and saying, okay, we need to get to next Tuesday. It's like the comparison of when I was a kid and in my agenda at school, I'd write how many days until a new video game was coming out. And that's on a much lesser scale. These guys have their livelihoods on the line, but that number is very limited. In stone, there's probably 40 to 42 players that know they already have jobs. There's probably another 15-ish that are like, okay, I'll probably start to figure out what practice squads I might be able to sneak my way into. And then there's that middle group that they're hanging on to their horses coming into this last game.
All right, Gino, let's predict the defense. So you kept 25 players on offense. I went with 24 just because I kept only 2 tight ends. So let's go with defense here. Who'd you keep on the edge? And I guess you can consider this defensive end, that, stand-up position. Yeah, we'll combine that.
So Sam linebacker, Jack linebacker, edge, whatever you want to label it as in a Vic Fangio world. I said they went with 6. I went Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, Brandon Graham, Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, and the belle of the ball of the last couple games, Patrick Johnson, who he's not just a preseason darling. I think he's deservedly played his way into a roster spot the last 4 seasons since becoming a Philadelphia Eagle. And it's going to come at the expense of maybe losing a stand-up inside linebacker, but the 4, maybe not tipping my hand there on how many I kept, that are playing that inside backer position, I think your mind is at ease in saying, okay, we don't have to kind of force one of these other guys on the roster just because we don't have anybody else. We actually have players there, so maybe we can get away and keep a better player in a Patrick Johnson, who, if he gets cut, Lou, he's gone. I mean, he's as good as gone.
He's definitely making somebody else's 53. Unfortunately for me, and I've been saying it on the show for the last 2 weeks, he has definitely earned a roster spot, but I did end up keeping just 5. I went with Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, Brandon Graham, Jalix Hunt. The reason I didn't keep PJ on the roster is what you were alluding to. There is an inside linebacker I think they are going to keep that has some more tenure on this contract. Patrick Johnson, even if he makes the team, only has one more year left on this deal. Jalix Hunt has shown like he's a lot farther along. It was really tough. Like he's maybe number one of my last 4 out. This was a tough call, but I just went with the 5.
I think it's fair, especially with the emergence of Jalix Hunt. It's like if
it's
you are
because
going
Johnson's
to give them
been
snaps,
playing really well, Gino.
but if you're going to give that 5th guy in the rotation snap,
it's
probably give it to Jalix Hunt.
Defensive tackle, I think we probably agree here. I kept 6, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, Marlon Tuipulotu, and Moro Ojomo. They not only earned a roster spot, but they're going to play a lot this year. And then speaking of earned a spot, like Thomas Booker has turned heads. Like he was not on my predictions ever before this, and I think he's earned a spot.
It was him or Patrick Johnson. I'm a huge Thomas Booker fan, and you're probably thinking I'm just blowing smoke up your rear ends. Go listen to that draft. He was one of my guys. I love Thomas Booker because of what he could do as that tweener type of player. I mentioned Charles Omenihu is one of the guys that I comped him to almost, and you could see it, man. Like he's exactly the type
that
of
was
fit
Thomas Booker. That's right.
Yeah, I wasn't blowing smoke up your rear ends, guys. Like he's a guy that fits exactly what you and I love, where in a Vic Fangio world, he might just have to play a gap and a half, but he can get upfield, man. You saw it last game, and he has really earned it. I went with 5, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton, Marlon, and Morrow, the law firm there, those young 3 guys. I think you'll have a good rotation. PJ Mustapher is probably a veteran you keep on the practice squad that you can elevate at times. But if anybody is going to push the envelope to challenge that 53rd spot, Thomas Booker falls into that category of somebody who they're hanging onto the seat of their pants.
Yeah, I just remember too, like Fangio in a press conference said he wants, and he doesn't consider like edge defensive linemen. He said they want to keep like 6 to 7. And I didn't know if he meant like maybe Josh Sweat or Brandon Graham count in that category, but that was also part of what went into the decision. But I think that's a tough call, Gino, between like it's Patrick Johnson, it's Thomas Booker, and then I think at inside linebacker, it's probably Ben Van Sumeren. You can probably only keep 2 of those 3.
That's probably the best way to look at it, honestly.
Right? Because was Van Sumeren the one that you were kind of going back and forth with at ILB?
Yeah, and the reason I chose Patrick Johnson is because of the rotation element there at edge, and Patrick Johnson does play special teams.
Yeah, so they both play special teams. So
you kind of cancel out.
It.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're going to put a plus in the box of Ben Van Sumeren and you look at his exceptional special teams ability, but then you say, oh, Patrick Johnson could do that, and he could potentially be a rotational rusher where on the interior, when it comes to those linebackers, dude, I want to keep all 4 of them on the field at this point. Like they all really offer you something in terms of Devin White and his just downhill ferocity. And Nakobe Dean has really been coming into his own, being able to do a little bit of everything. Trot has kind of showed you a little bit more, and the odd man out like Ben Van Sumeren, it's unfortunate, but I think you got to go with 4. And I think you have a pretty good 4 all in all.
Yeah. So that's the only place that we decipher or we differ there.
Zach Bond was the last one I couldn't think of.
White, Bond, Dean, Trotter, Van Sumeren for me. Orion Berkstead returned to practice, got some work with the 2s, but mostly the 3s this week. I think he's too far behind Gino at this point. I think they wanted him to be maybe one of those like top special teams players, but I think the other guys have earned a spot over Burks, and maybe you can stash him on the practice squad. Not sure. He was the Niners' 3rd linebacker that did end up playing in the Super Bowl a lot last year when Greenlaw went down, but yeah, I don't think you can really justify keeping him on the roster.
No.
So let's see. We both kept 16 defensive players total so far. Cornerback, we went heavy probably. I think this is the deepest position on the team from top to bottom. Who'd you keep here at corner?
So I'm weird with corner because I lump Cooper DeJean in with the safety group.
Okay,
I think inevitably he's going to be your nickel / do-it-all Swiss Army knife. Sure. I've made that pretty evident over the couple months as we've drafted him. At corner, I went Slay. Quinyon Mitchell's starting to get first team reps, Lou, so just relax a little bit. He's getting there.
I'm chilling. I know he's going to be on the field no matter what now, so it's
Yep, exactly. Ringo, Rogers, and Ricks. I only went with 5. I think Josh Jobe, that Vic Fangio comment of him making too many dumb penalties in camp.
Yeah.
Fangio's a guy who wears his emotion on his sleeve, even though Job is a really good special teams player. When I was breaking it down, you either have Ben Van Summeren or Patrick Johnson or Josh Job. You can't get all of them. I think the younger corners, much like that linebacker discussion, I'd rather see the very good guys that are young that you have up top over keeping a guy like Job, where you kind of know where he is in his career. And no, I think, disrespect to him. He's going to find a place on another team. But, I mean, that combination of Darius Slay, who's a borderline Hall of Famer at this point, and then that 4 young guys you have in that group mix in Cooper DeJean and CGJ's ability to cover as well, and Sidney Brown when he comes back. Like, Josh Job's just in a tough spot, wrong place, wrong time, unfortunately.
No, I agree. And I ended up keeping the same corners, although I kept 6 because I listed DeJean as a corner, but I had
fair.
Slay, Mitchell, Rogers, Ringo, DeJean, and Ricks. I wouldn't be surprised if Eli Ricks ends up being a trade piece. Like maybe he's the guy that helps you get a Robert Woods or a receiver from another team. But if not, if you just sign somebody or you trade a low-end pick, I think Eli Ricks is, even with as much depth you have at this young corner spot, I think he's too good to just completely let go. Like he's got a lot of traits, and who knows?
He was one of the guys I was talking about on the intro when I was saying, like, hey, maybe let's keep some of these young guys and not let them hit the free agent market.
Like we haven't seen as promising as all these other 4 or 5 corners are. You got to see what happens on the field, because we used to say this in 2019. Like, man, you've got Sidney Jones, Rasul Douglas, Cravon LeBlanc, Avonte Maddox. They're all flashing. Like, how do you play all these guys? How can you keep this guy? And then pretty much none of them worked out except for Zool for another team and Maddox to a certain floor. So I don't hate the idea of hanging on to Ricks, who has a lot of potential in his own right. So then for safety, I kept 4. CGJ, Reed Blankenship, Sidney Brown, I do think will get activated. I don't think he'll start the year on the PUP. So I have him, and then Avonte Maddox as my 4th. So I kept 10 defensive backs total.
So you cut Caden Stearns out of that equation.
I did cut Caden Stearns, yep. Which maybe, and I think he's going to be stashed on IR. I've heard from reporters say that he is not, like he walks gingerly. Like it doesn't look like he's close to being healthy.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so that's what made me kind of think maybe he's the one that starts on the PUP or short-term IR, and Sid gets activated.
Okay. So I went in the equation if Brown does start the year on PUP.
Yeah.
I went with CJ, Reed, Cooper DeJean, and Avonte Maddox.
And Gino, maybe because of how good Maddox looks, they think let's not rush Brown back and give him some more time to recover. I mean, I don't think that's unlikely.
That's a fair way to look at it as well. And
Avonte's look great.
I think corner and safety are where you can kind of play the long game a little bit here.
Yeah,
where wide receiver, it's like, let's rush the envelope. Like we need to pick up the pace, find some talent. Corner, it's like, okay, maybe we can kind of just see how this plays out. And same with safety. It's like guys are overperforming to an extent. And is that the worst world to live in when years in the past you haven't had these guys like you have been talking about, Lou? I think Avonte Maddox, the coaching staff has to love his ability to play multiple positions, his willingness to come back at a lower number. I mean, he could have just said, like, screw off, Howie Roseman. You don't want me at the number you paid me at originally. Comes back, takes on a completely different role. They're high on James Bradbury for doing exactly that. Why wouldn't you do it with the younger, more athletic, more versatile type of player in Avonte Maddox right now? And James Bradbury still, man, like I feel bad for him, but he's going to find a place in the National Football League. It's just not going to be in Philadelphia.
No, it's not. And you saw against New England, like a lot of the same issues are there that will not allow him to effectively translate to safety.
It's over.
All right, let's and then of course special teams. Elliott, Mann, Lovato. We've got our 3 boys.
Braden Mann's a good punter, man. Like he can kick the heck out of the ball.
Thank God, because it was about a year and a half where the Eagles could not punt to save their life.
No, we were hoping Aaron
it was something we
could
took
get
for
it
granted.
over the 50-yard line. Yeah,
it's like punting something you definitely took for granted. You're like, okay, it's just the meat and potatoes. You just need it. It's not fun, but you gotta have it for sure. And I definitely have it with Mann.
Now more than ever, too, like special teams, it's so evident that it's going to be a huge area to gain those hitting yards.
Like, Jake Elliott was such an underrated part of all of.
How many games do you lose without Jake's success?
Yeah, you don't beat the Bills last year without Jake Elliott. You don't win a lot of those close games without number 4. So don't overlook those 3 guys. All right, Gino, coming up next, we'll recap our 53-man roster prediction with our last 4 in and last 4 out. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. All right, we're wrapping up this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, predicting the Eagles' 53-man roster. So, Gino, going over our team, I think the only real differences that we had on offense, the only way we just were different was you kept 3 tight ends. I only kept 2. We both kept Goddard and Calcaterra. You kept Alberto. On defense, you kept Patrick Johnson on the edge. I did not. I kept Thomas Booker instead at defensive tackle. You also went a little lighter at inside linebacker, keeping off Ben Van Sumeren. So you kept 4. I did keep Van Sumeren on the roster. And then at cornerback, I think we were in agreement there. So we're pretty much on the same page for the most part. Who were your last 4 in, though, and your last 4 out?
So for me, the last 4 in, Avonte Maddox. This is in no respective order either.
Yeah.
Avonte Maddox, Patrick Johnson, Dylan McMahon, and then whatever tight end I picked, Alberto, DJ Jenkins. Like that, I think it's clear who the last 4 in are.
I think mine were McMahon. I had Darian Kennard would be one of those guys. Ben Van Sumeren, and then I would probably say it's Thomas Booker. Although all of them have pretty much earned that spot, but those were the last 4 that I squeaked in. And then the last one's out. That was tougher. Like I think there were some tough calls. Like I think Patrick Johnson for me was obviously the top one.
Yeah, and Thomas Booker for me was of course one of those guys. And Matt Hennessy, I think he's going to find his way back, and I think he has done enough in the preseason, unlike a guy like Max Sharping, who clearly he was playing out of position at left.
Yeah, why are they playing him at left tackle? That seemed odd to me. He's never played tackle.
Seemed unfair to him, like to put him in that position. I don't think anybody on that offensive line outside of that is really you're gonna look and say, oh yeah, they deserve that spot. You can make the argument for John Ross, like he's been consistent for you that he could be that last guy, and I think Josh Jobe probably for me is.
You nailed my 4 too. I had Patrick Johnson, Josh
we
Jobe,
think alike, man. It's
John
scary.
Ross, Matt Hennessy. So but I think that's right. I don't know if there's any honorable mentions. I say Eli Ricks was one of the last ones in, but it more so had to do with, the trade market. And I will say, I don't know if it's a confidence thing. I don't know if he sees the writing on the wall, but he definitely hasn't turned a lot of heads so far at camp. He kind of has gotten lost in the mix, and even in the preseason, last year he turned heads. I mean, there was a reason he made the team. He made splash plays, and last year he was a UDFA that wasn't really given he wasn't favored to make the roster. And this year, I think, I don't know, maybe that's it, is he sees just 5-6 guys ahead of him and he feels buried, but we really haven't heard much about Ricks.
Yeah, he might be the one that we're saying maybe we don't have the best feel on his situation.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
I really don't know that, but we're going on what we saw on tape and the reliability that if you have to play one of these guys in any minutes, let's take the known commodity there. And I think the element of the new practice squad rules with the 4 veterans and teams favoring bringing in some of this younger talent, i.e. the Philadelphia Eagles. Well, if you're going to poach young talent, you protect your young talent. And I just think you don't make the same mistakes that you have made at cut down days in the past, where you might have been regretting some of these decisions that might have been a little bit more short-sighted, i.e. 2018, 2019, like we have discussed.
So before we wrap up the show, Gino, of these last 4 out, who is the guy that has the best shot of making the team based on what he does on Saturday? Could any of these players we didn't have make the roster, Saturday, say, never mind, we're switching it, he's on the team? Who has, the shortest path to kind of reverse that?
Ooh.
It might be Booker versus Patrick Johnson. If one of them look great again.
Yeah, let's take those 2 out of the equation, because that's just a one or the other is going to make it. It's tough, and
it might be Jobe. It might be Jobe if he makes a big special teams play and Ricks doesn't do well, and they can trade Ricks. It might be Josh Jobe.
I was also thinking Matt Hennessy, simply because if Tyler Steen is injured and Hennessy might have to play an entire half of football potentially, could he be the best looking guy in that offensive line, where maybe that decision has already been made, that they know he's going to come back after the cut down and they've had those discussions. But in terms of the younger guys, I think we kind of know the guys who haven't hit that their pedal to the metal yet. Like Anais Smith, he'll be stashed away, and maybe Dylan McMahon. Like teams are not gonna just steal like a late day 3 pick from
I
you.
could see though, because of Anais Smith's 5th round label, Gino, if he had a monster game on Saturday, I could see him.
It's Howie
cracking
Roseman.
that 50. Yeah, because he
Yes.
favors his picks, and I totally get that logic for Howie. If he just went off on Saturday, I could see him squeaking in at the last second if they don't trade for anybody or sign
It was
somebody.
reported by our friend over at CBS Sports, Jeff Kerr, that today was far and away Anais Smith's best practice, man. So
Yeah.
never say never. That's what makes these decisions tough, because you could get so caught up in the "what have you done for me lately" element, the hype of what they could be, what you saw last year. There's so many differentiating factors that leave us here at Locked On Eagles we're guessing for like 40% of the equation here, but I think we have a pretty good understanding of where this roster lies in total.
Yeah. Completely agree. Let us know what you think about our 53-man roster predictions on Twitter or X, whatever, at LockedOnBirds, at DiBiase, LOE, and at GC24_football. We've got 3 more shows for you this week, 1 more preseason game on Saturday, and then we get ready for Eagles-Packers in Brazil. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Again, make sure your second listen is the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get ready for your drafts with Vinny Liar and everyone over at Locked On Fantasy Football. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.